There's something about games running on old hardware that punch above their weight class that is truly magical. The so-called impossible port, as I call it here, is where you have a game that appears to be too demanding for the target hardware, and yet developers find a way to make it happen. And just when I've convinced myself that just about everything impossible has already been done, something new comes along, which is absolutely mind-blowing. What you're looking at here is Grand Theft Auto 3 running on my stock Dreamcast hardware, with zero modifications at all. For reference, this is running off a burnt CDR booting directly into my Dreamcast. For the output, we're using a VGA adapter going into a 31 kHz old school VGA display. No smoke, no mirrors, just GTA 3. Although there was confirmation that GTA 3's life did begin initially on the Dreamcast, it was quickly scrapped in favor of the PlayStation 2 version, and this was done for financial reasons. But for years, the debate raged on whether it was even possible for a game like GTA 3 to even run on the Dreamcast. Those that say it is possible turn to a game like Shenmue as an example. Shenmue is one of the earliest examples of what I would consider an open world game, but each section of the game is loaded in, with a distinct loading screen to load in the next section. This is different from an open world game that requires heavy texture streaming at all times. On the PlayStation 2, this problem is solved by the vector units and the fast DMAC controller that can move data around the bus at lightning fast speeds. On the original Xbox version, the hard drive is responsible for streaming asset data in and out of memory very quickly. In comparison, the Dreamcast only has 16 megabytes of memory. For reference, that's half of what the PlayStation 2 has. Not only this, the Dreamcast lacks any type of dedicated coprocessors and hardware chips responsible for streaming data around the bus at lightning speeds. But what it does possess is a powerful 3D architecture, a 128-bit vector computation engine, and most importantly, a best-in-class homebrew community. Once the challenge has been thrown down, someone is bound to take it on. This port of GTA 3 to the Dreamcast surely stands as the definitive impossible port, and one of the most impressive pieces of programming I've seen in a long time. Before we dive in too deep, we have to be clear that this is the first public alpha release of the game, known as DCA3. Development of this port to the Dreamcast isn't new. If you've been following along with the team, they've shown improvements on the game in just 6 months from the initial inception to this alpha release. The entire game, I'm told, is fully playable from start to finish with all cutscenes. And if we take a look at this intro sequence, you can tell that this is a very impressive port. So how did this port ever come to be? What was the motivation behind it? And how exactly do you manage to run GTA 3 on a Dreamcast? Well, let's take a quick history lesson. GTA 3 and its sequels Vice City and San Andreas have all been reverse engineered, and their public repositories and source code have been available for years. The engine that powers GTA 3, known as Renderware, was also reverse engineered, leading to various homebrew and unofficial GTA 3 ports to various systems. I personally have covered ports of the game running on the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation Vita via homebrew means quite a few years ago. Unfortunately, however, Take-Two, who owns Grand Theft Auto, stepped in with a DMCA takedown on all reverse engineering efforts and forced the removal of the GitHub repositories, including a lawsuit against the developers. This lawsuit alleged an infringement of original copyright material. It effectively put an end to the GTA 3 reverse engineering work that was ongoing. But as always behind the scenes, there are always teams of individuals that look to take on the challenge. The reverse engineering source code still is out there, and one of the DCA3 team members, Stefanos Cornelios Mitsis aka SKMP, reviewed the source code back in June of 2024 and determined that it could indeed be possible to run GTA 3 on the Dreamcast. The biggest concerns would be memory limitations, with just 16 megabytes of main memory and a relative small amount of VRAM that the Dreamcast supports. Within a few weeks, however, the team had something running. This was exclusively running on a Dreamcast with a 32 megabyte mod, or via emulation with 32 megabytes enabled. Getting the game to run on a stock Dreamcast with just 16 megabytes would be a challenge. According to the development team, the initial goal was to get the game up and running with a Dreamcast using 32 megabytes of memory. And early tests were showing the engine running at 27 frames per second with rendering disabled. This meant that the entire game engine itself was more than capable of running well before any optimizations were even considered. SKMP worked to optimize and reduce memory overhead so the game could load and run on a stock 16 meg Dreamcast, and the rendering code was also implemented. However, some sacrifices were made along the way. Notably, a sticking point was that the Dreamcast VRAM is just 8 megabytes for its frame buffer, display lists, and textures. So something had to give, and textures were reduced in size to allow for everything to fit. During the build process outlined on the DCA3 GitHub, a tool called TextConvert manages the texture size reduction process. The hope is that the team can optimize and enhance textures back into the game to make them more in line with what the Dreamcast expects. For me, the most impressive aspect of this port is the lighting implementation. In my eyes, it's parity with the original PlayStation 2 version, and it looks superb. According to the development team, who incidentally go by the name The Gang, initial work on implementing a lighting system tanked performance, but with optimized SH4 code and some SKMP magic, the game's performance was improved. Now, this alpha version is far from perfect in that regard. The target frame rate of GTA 3 is 30 frames per second, and the GTA 3 version on the Dreamcast hovers between 17 to 25 FPS for the most part. When the game gets more demanding, the frame rate tends to dip. SKMP admits that the game can run much faster, hitting that 30 FPS target more often, and this is something that I would expect to see improved when the next official public release is made available. One really interesting feature of this particular port is that if you do have a VMU connected to your Dreamcast pad, you will get statistics on the performance of the game. As you can see here, we're seeing the frame rate hovering at about 20 frames per second. We're also seeing the utilization of the SH4 processor, the PowerVR GPU. You can see it's utilizing about 86% of the total performance that's available, as well as additional information from the Vertex processing. This is obviously mainly used for the development team right now, I would say, but it is a very interesting look in to see how well performance is running just alone on this alpha release, which you can see that there is still a little bit of overhead to push the game a little further. And I think that's exactly what the team is looking to do. Another very important aspect of Grand Theft Auto 3 is the game's streaming system, and this implementation in this alpha version has been done quite well. We have to consider that GTA 3 is an open world game that requires everything to be streamed in and out of memory. We're talking both RAM and VRAM. Sound effects, geometry, models, textures, music, literally everything needs to be streamed in and out. And this is why the CD drive is not really recommended at this time if you are running off a burnt CD. However, the team does admit that there is room for improvement to build out a better streaming system. As it stands in this alpha version, we are seeing the streaming system run quite well. However, there are stutters and pauses, especially during collisions with other cars, where the game must stream in the collision scripts and animations. But to be honest, I'm surprised at just how well the game runs from CD, even with this alpha release. I took a car and literally just drove around the map, and yes, there are stutters and hitches as mentioned. We can see that the CD drive is keeping up with the game and pulling in all the relevant asset data and loading them into memory as required. Now, I do want to talk about sound effects and music in this particular port. They are all here with the radio stations all intact, and everything works as expected. Just like the textures, sound effects and music also went through a conversion process. First, the conversion from .wav files to PCM audio, and all sound effects and music were resampled down to either 12 kHz or 6 kHz mono. The result of this is that all audio in the game can be heard, including the radio stations in the game working without issue. Now, once again, we're running the game off a burnt CDR, so there's always going to be a slight pause as you're switching radio stations. Now, if you do have an optical drive emulation solution, you're probably not going to notice this at all. The game also takes full advantage of Dreamcast features such as VGA output. As you can see, we're running 31 kHz on my old school CRT, and it even allows you to run with dual analog sticks via USB for Maple. Incidentally, the controls on a stock Dreamcast pad feel really great. It takes a little adjustment to find the camera controls, but once you get the hang of that, and aside from this, I had no issues navigating and playing the game. It feels very, very smooth. One issue that I did come across, and I'm not sure if it was just me or it hasn't been implemented yet, is that I was unable to save my game. But once again, this is an alpha release, which is already leaps and bounds better than what I would have expected, and the team admits they aren't done yet. With more time and polish, this could easily be one of the best and technically impressive Dreamcast games to have ever released. Now I do want to address the elephant in the room here, and that's Take-Two. Will they come after the developers and DMCA the source code repository? If the past history has shown us anything, then let's be honest, Take-Two will probably try to take down this repository at some point. However, I am hopeful that this project has been made by a team of talented developers who just love the Dreamcast and aren't looking for any type of monetary gain. This is simply a passion project to port a game to hardware that has not been available to consumers for over 23 years. The developers have been very careful to make sure that everything has been done in an above-board way. First of all, they don't provide any game data at all. You need to provide your own GTA3 data files, and for reference, I own the Steam version and just provided those files when I went through the build process. They also don't provide any sort of ISO or GDI image for you to burn. That also must be done by the end user. Compiling up and building your own ISO isn't hard if you follow the steps exactly as provided on the website. However, the threat of Take-Two taking legal action for any reason and claiming copyright infringement is real. This is the world that we live in, unfortunately. This alpha release is already leaps and bounds better than what I would have expected, and the team admits they aren't done yet. With more time and polish, this could be one of the best and technically impressive ports that's ever released. Not only this, it's important to note that this release has been developed exclusively with the homebrew Dreamcast SDK known as Callistos. It's a showcase of just how good this SDK is and how far it's come. It's very well optimized and tuned for building excellent Dreamcast homebrew and games. As it stands, this alpha version of DCA3 is one of the most impressive pieces of work that I've seen in a very long time. It's up there with the best Impossible ports around. It's right up there with Doom on the SNES or even Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64. But we're going to leave it here for today's episode. There will be relevant links to everything that I talked about in the description below. And if you like this episode, please don't forget to leave me a like. And as always, we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.